It was just another quiet afternoon in Maple Hollow, a sleepy little town where time moved like molasses and strangers rarely passed through. The sun filtered gently through the oak trees lining Main Street, casting warm light over the cafe, the post office, and the old stone fountain that hadn't run in years. Emma was sipping tea on the bench outside Harper's bookstore, Duke curled obediently at her feet, calm, still, watchful as ever. That's when he came. A tall man in a dark coat, face shaded by a ball cap, moving like he didn't want to be noticed. Most people barely looked up, but Duke did. He rose slowly, muscles tense, ears perked, and then let out a bark so sharp, so fierce, it made the wind pause. One bark, then another. The stranger froze mid-step. Conversation stopped. A baby cried. Even the birds scattered. Duke's barking only grew louder, wilder, as if something deep in him had cracked open, something he remembered that no one else did. And in that moment, as every eye turned toward the dog and the man he refused to ignore, the quiet little town of Maple Hollow changed forever. Maple Hollow was the kind of place people drove through without realizing they had. A single blinking traffic light hung over Main Street like a sleepy eye, and the rusted bench outside Harper's bookstore hadn't been repainted since the Reagan administration. The townsfolk liked it that way, unchanged, predictable. Emma Caldwell had lived here all her life. 59 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and recently widowed, she had inherited her late husband's modest farmhouse just outside town and settled into a rhythm that made the loneliness feel less sharp. Her constant companion was Duke, a 7-year-old German shepherd she and her husband had rescued as a pup. Duke had always been gentle. He was the kind of dog who'd walk kids across the street or nudge Emma's elbow when it was time to stop grading papers. That's why his sudden change in behavior on that ordinary spring afternoon made the town, and Emma, go still. At first, she thought he'd seen a squirrel or a bird. He stood up so fast she nearly spilled her tea. His hackles were raised, teeth bared, not in play, but warning. Then came the barking. Fierce, guttural, primal. It was the kind of sound that didn't come from fear. It came from memory. The stranger had barely made it halfway across the square. Weathered, wearing a faded black coat, boots with worn soles, and a gray cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't stop, didn't react, just kept walking. But the air changed. People stepped back. Mothers held their children's hands tighter. Even the grocer across the street paused halfway through unloading a crate of apples. Everyone looked at the man and then at Duke, who was now pulling at his leash, barking louder with every step the stranger took. Emma rose to her feet, voice soft but firm. Duke, that's enough. But he didn't hear her, or chose not to. He was locked onto the man with the intensity of a dog who'd been trained for war. Only he hadn't been. Duke was raised in quiet fields, on porches and schoolyards. He'd never shown aggression. Not once. And yet now, it was as if something ancient had stirred inside him. The stranger paused at the edge of the square, turned ever so slightly, not fully, just enough for the sunlight to catch his jawline. Then he was gone. He turned the corner by the old barber shop and disappeared down an alley no one had used in years. Emma held Duke back until he calmed, his barking fading into confused whimpers. He sat down suddenly, as if the energy had drained from him all at once. His chest rose and fell quickly, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the man had stood. Emma crouched beside him, placed a hand on his back. "What was that?" she whispered. Duke leaned into her touch, but his gaze didn't move. For the rest of the day, the square buzzed like a shaken hive. People whispered in grocery lines. Someone said the man looked familiar. Another swore they'd seen him years ago, during the flood cleanup, though no one could place his name. Sheriff Murray walked through later, half embarrassed to even ask questions, scribbling vague notes in his weathered pad. "Probably a drifter," he muttered. "Dogs pick up on strange smells. Nothing more." But Emma wasn't so sure. That night, as she fed Duke his dinner and turned on the porch light, she noticed something else. He wouldn't rest. Instead, he stood by the front door for hours, ears twitching, muscles tense. Every time a car passed, he'd glance toward the window. Every creak in the floor made him growl low in his throat. She tried to distract him with toys, treats, a walk, but nothing broke his focus. He was guarding, waiting, like he knew the stranger hadn't left. Not really. Emma sat on the edge of her bed later that night, brushing Duke's fur as he lay at her feet. "You've never done that before," she murmured. "What did you see?" She stared into his deep brown eyes, hoping for an answer that would never come. But something inside her shifted, something unsettled. Not fear. Not yet. Just a quiet, gnawing sense that whatever had happened today wasn't over. That Duke had recognized something the rest of them couldn't. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees near the road. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then silence. Emma turned off the lamp and lay back slowly. Duke didn't move. He didn't sleep. He just watched the door, breathing low and steady, as if waiting for someone who had once belonged and might come back, not to be seen, but to be reckoned with. For the next 2 days, Duke wouldn't leave the town square alone. Every morning after breakfast, he'd pace by the door, tail stiff, ears twitching, waiting for Emma to grab the leash. And every time they walked into town, he pulled in the same direction, toward the west end, past the bakery, beyond the hardware store, and straight to the building no one used anymore, the old town archives. The stone building sat in partial ruin, its brick walls weathered by decades of storms, its windows clouded over with dust and history. Emma had to brace herself against Duke's weight as he dragged her to the chain-link gate, nose pressed to the bars, body trembling, not with fear, but something closer to urgency. He didn't bark this time. He didn't growl. He just stared, pawing the ground, letting out soft, frustrated whines like he was remembering something no one had told him to forget. At first, Emma brushed it off. "You're just wound up," she whispered, stroking his neck. "You don't know what you're looking for." But even as she said the words, they felt hollow. Duke had never acted this way before. Not even after her husband died. Not when fireworks cracked the sky on the 4th of July. Not when storms rattled the windows. He wasn't reacting, he was remembering. That word stuck in her mind more and more. Remembering. That night, Emma dug through the few adoption records she had for Duke. They had rescued him nearly 7 years ago from a shelter just 2 towns over. He'd been skittish then, thin, with a deep scar behind his left shoulder. The shelter had told them he was a stray, no chip, no tags, just found wandering near a closed military base. "Sweet dog," the staff had said. "Bit of a ghost, though. Doesn't bark. Doesn't beg. Just watches." Emma had thought it endearing, even noble. But now she wondered, what had Duke seen before he came into their lives? She couldn't shake the image of that stranger in the square. The man had never looked directly at her. Never spoke. But Duke had locked onto him like a soldier spotting an enemy across enemy lines. And the barking, that bark wasn't a reaction. It was a warning, not of danger, of recognition. The next day, she returned to town without errands. No groceries, no appointments, just curiosity and a leash. Duke led her straight to the archive building again. This time, she noticed the small brass plaque near the door. Municipal Records. Established 1936. The building had once held town council minutes, historical blueprints, and even personnel files back when the county's operations were centralized. Now it was little more than storage, its entrance locked with rusted chain and a "Do Not Enter" sign bleached pale by the sun. Duke scratched at the gate and whimpered low. Emma stood quietly, scanning the building's frame, the cracked sidewalk leading up to it, the side alley where the stranger had vanished days before. She tugged gently on the leash. "Come on, love," she said. But Duke didn't move. Not until she tugged harder, almost apologetically. He turned away slowly, like leaving something sacred behind. That night, Emma sat on her porch, scrolling through old local news articles on her aging tablet. Duke lay by her feet, gaze still drifting toward the road like a sentry on duty. She searched the archive building. A few references came up, mostly boring ones. Budget meetings, relocation of files, storm damage repairs. But one article caught her eye. Archive building too close after flood exposure. Hazard or history? The article dated back 9 years, and the photograph beneath it showed a group of men in city uniforms assessing the property. Her breath caught. One of the men, standing off to the side in the shadows, looked familiar. The grainy photo didn't show much, but the posture, the coat, the sharpness in his face, it looked like the man from the square. Emma leaned forward. Duke sat up instantly. His ears twitched. His nose flared. She turned the screen toward him. "You know him, don't you?" she whispered. Duke pressed his nose to the tablet, letting out a low, rumbling growl that rose slowly, like thunder building in his chest. Something was wrong with this town's history. Something in that building wasn't just old, it was forgotten. Or buried. Or both. Emma closed the tablet slowly, her fingers trembling. "What were you before we found you, Duke?" she asked, not expecting an answer. But he looked up at her, not like a pet, like a partner, like someone who had seen things, carried things, and was just waiting for someone else to remember too. Emma had always found comfort in the church basement. Something about the cool stone walls, the worn wooden tables, the faint scent of hymn books and old candles. It reminded her of potluck dinners and children's choir recitals, of simpler years when the only things worth worrying about were casserole contests and rusty handbells. But today, the space felt different. Her footsteps echoed off the floor like questions with no answers. Reverend Harris had kindly allowed her access to the old newspaper archive stored behind the fellowship hall, a narrow room lined with steel cabinets and sagging boxes, all labeled with decades handwritten in fading ink. "No one's touched this stuff in years," he said as he unlocked the door. "But if there's something you're looking for, sometimes the past has a funny way of waiting to be found." He chuckled, but Emma didn't. Duke was with her, trailing closely behind, silent and alert. The boxes were dusty and heavy, and the fluorescent light above flickered with every breeze from the old basement vents. Emma dug through folders marked 1990s, 1980s, 1970s, until something stopped her. A manila envelope tucked into a file labeled simply, "Incident, Unfiled." No date, no location, just 2 red paper clips and a name scrawled in faint pencil on the back. H. Carter. She opened it slowly. Inside were torn clippings from the local Gazette, some yellowed and crumbling, some barely legible. One headline stood out: "Tragedy at Bell Street. Family home destroyed in mysterious fire." Dated 15 years ago. The article described a sudden blaze that consumed the Harper residence on Bell Street. 2 parents presumed dead, 1 child missing. Cause? Unknown. Witnesses? None. The article ended with a short line: "Last seen with a man in a dark coat, name unconfirmed." Emma felt a chill crawl up her neck. She flipped through the other documents and found a photo, brittle at the corners. It showed a group of firefighters and onlookers standing near the smoldering remains of a house. And there, just at the edge of the crowd, almost lost in shadow, was a tall man in a coat and cap, looking away from the camera. Her hands trembled. She turned the photo toward Duke. He stiffened. There was no mistaking it now. He rose to his feet, ears locked forward, and let out a low, guttural growl, not rage, but recognition. The same way he had growled on the day in the square. Emma knelt beside him, her eyes locked on the image. "You've seen him before," she whispered. "And not just in town." She snapped a photo of the clipping on her phone and kept digging. Another article appeared, dated a few months after the fire. "Child's remains never found. Case closed for lack of evidence." No arrests. No follow-up. Just silence. Reverend Harris peeked into the room an hour later. "Any luck?" he asked, wiping dust from his hands. Emma nodded slowly, her voice low. "Do you remember a fire on Bell Street?" About 15 years ago? The Reverend frowned. I do. Terrible thing. Folks said it was an accident, but what? She pressed. He sighed. But that family, something always felt off. People said they moved here too fast, left no paper trail. And that man, the one spotted at the scene. Emma stood. You saw him? Only once. At the grocery store. Gave me the coldest feeling I've ever had from another human. He shook his head. Disappeared after that. Just gone. That night, back at home, Emma pinned the photo of the man next to Duke's adoption certificate on the corkboard above her desk. She stared at the two documents like puzzle pieces that refused to click, but somehow belonged to the same box. Duke paced the living room, restless again. His instincts were reigniting. Emma could feel it in the air, heavy as thunder before a storm. She made tea and sat on the porch, phone in hand, the photo pulled up again. As she studied the man's outline, his stance, the tilt of his head, she realized something chilling. The photo wasn't just familiar. It matched the silhouette she'd seen through the dusty window of the town archive building days earlier. The same coat, same height, same mystery. Duke emerged beside her and sat, pressing against her leg protectively. She looked down at him, brushing her fingers across his scarred shoulder. You were there, weren't you? Not just for us. Before. His ears flicked. His tail didn't move. Emma knew then. Whatever was buried in this town had roots in more than just fire. It had been covered, forgotten, but not by everyone. Not by this dog. And not anymore. The photo haunted her. Even days later, Emma couldn't look at the screen without feeling her stomach tighten. The man, just a silhouette in a 15-year-old clipping, was burned into her memory now, as vivid as if she'd spoken to him yesterday. And every time she glanced at Duke, saw the tension in his shoulders, the sharp flick of his ears, the way he stood facing the door at night like a soldier waiting for a breach, she felt it again. Something about this stranger wasn't just unsettling. It was dangerous. And Duke knew it. That afternoon, she returned to the Maple Hollow Library, a place she hadn't visited in months. The librarian, Mrs. Claremont, was a gentle woman with large glasses and a soft voice. When Emma asked about local crime stories from over a decade ago, Mrs. Claremont gave a worried look but didn't ask why. She disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later with a slim binder labeled Archive, Local Events, Closed Cases. The case was barely mentioned in the town's official records. No real headlines, no investigations that went beyond the surface. Just a quiet article from 12 years ago. Family of 3 missing, last seen near Bell Street. No bodies. No suspects. No follow-up. The article described a man named Gregory Harper, his wife Lila, and their 8-year-old daughter Maddie. They were renting a small house, keeping to themselves. One neighbor reported seeing a tall man leaving the property the same night the family vanished. The description, dark coat, cap, silent demeanor. No name. No details. Just that. He walked away and they were never seen again. Emma reread the clipping 3 times before she whispered, Bell Street. It was the same street as the fire. The same surname. Harper. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a story that had been buried twice, once by ash, once by silence. And now, for some reason, it was surfacing again. She snapped a photo of the article and thanked Mrs. Claremont before leaving. Outside, the air felt heavier, thick with the weight of old truth clawing its way back into the light. Back home, Duke's behavior changed again. He wouldn't leave her side, not even for a moment. He followed her from room to room, laying outside the bathroom, sitting alert at the foot of her bed. At night, he paced the hallway, sniffing the windows, barking at shadows that no one else could see. One evening, while Emma folded laundry, she accidentally dropped a shirt. As she bent to pick it up, a sharp sound echoed through the still house. Duke growled from the front door, ears flat, body rigid. She hurried over, heart thudding. Through the front window, she saw nothing. Just the empty yard, the wind gently swaying the oak tree. The Duke didn't relax. Not for minutes. His eyes were fixed. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Emma placed a gentle hand on his back. "You're protecting me, aren't you?" she said softly. "Just like you were trained to." She didn't know where the words came from, but they felt true. More true than anything else lately. That night, she slept with her bedroom door cracked open and the hallway light on. Duke lay at the threshold, not sleeping, not moving, just guarding. The next morning, she found deep scratch marks near the back door, as if someone, or something, had tried to open it in the night. She stared at the grooves in the wood and felt the cold seep into her bones. Nothing had been taken. Nothing broken. But it was a message. The test. Someone was watching. She took Duke to the vet later that day, under the pretense of a checkup, but mostly because she needed to talk to someone who knew dogs better than she did. Dr. Patel had seen Duke for years. She raised an eyebrow when Emma explained the sudden aggression, the alertness, the focus. "He's not reacting randomly," she said, gently stroking Duke's head. "This is a working dog. You said he was a rescue?" Emma nodded. "No chip." Emma shook her head. "We scanned him back then. Nothing." Dr. Patel hesitated. "Might be worth trying again. Technology's changed. Sometimes damaged chips can still send a signal." Emma agreed. Duke was calm during the process, but when the wand passed over his shoulder, the area with the old scar, it beeped faintly. Not a full code. Just a signal. Corrupted, scrambled, partial. Dr. Patel frowned. "That's odd. It's definitely a chip, but I can't read it fully. Almost like it was intentionally erased." Emma's heart pounded. Is that possible? With the right equipment, sure. But why someone would wipe a dog's ID unless they didn't want him traced? That night, Emma sat in her study, the clippings spread out like pieces of a shattered window. The fire, the missing family, the man in the photo, the scratched door, the growls, and now a microchip, scrambled but still there. It was Duke's past trying to surface. And the more it pushed upward, the more someone out there was trying to shove it back down. She turned to Duke, who lay beside her chair, watching the window. "You knew them, didn't you?" she said aloud. "The Harpers. The child. You were there. And now you're remembering." Duke didn't move, but his gaze tightened. Outside, the wind howled faintly. Something was coming. And this time, Emma wouldn't let it vanish in silence. Emma had never liked paperwork. Even as a teacher, she loathed digging through old forms, outdated policies, and dusty curriculum binders. But now, surrounded by stacks of printed articles, email records, adoption notes, and screen-grabbed forum posts, she felt like a woman building a puzzle out of burned edges and blurred photos. She had started searching military databases late into the night, whispering apologies to Duke every time the typing startled him. He lay curled at the foot of her desk, eyes half shut, but always alert, always listening. One name kept surfacing in closed forums and encrypted veteran threads. Salter. Not a common name in town. Not a name anyone had ever mentioned aloud. But one tied repeatedly to references of deep ops, civilian displacement, and signal interruption. All of it vague, all of it buried. Emma clicked deeper. One thread, started by someone using the handle Red Echo 73, asked if anyone had served under Major Marcus Salter. One of the replies chilled her. Salter didn't serve. He managed. Big difference. Dogs didn't bark at Salter unless they'd been trained by someone who vanished after Bell Street. She read it again. Bell Street. The fire. The man Duke barked at. Her heart thudded. It wasn't just the stranger Duke had recognized. It was a name from his former life. Duke stirred beside her. The wind rustled outside. Emma reached over and opened a new tab. A public records search. She typed, Marcus Salter, military, Maple Hollow. The results were limited as expected, but one entry blinked back. Temporary Operations HQ, Maple Hollow Fairgrounds, 14 years ago. A photo accompanied it, grainy and distant, but unmistakable. It was the man in the cap, the one Duke barked at, standing with a group of men in camouflage, holding a clipboard, eyes shaded. Caption: Field Intel Coordinator, Salter, reviewing evac protocols during simulated disaster response. Simulated. Fairgrounds. But she remembered no drill, no town-wide practice. And she'd lived here her entire life. Emma stared at the image. "You weren't training anyone," she whispered. "You were covering something up." She printed it and pinned it on the corkboard next to the article about the fire. Slowly, the narrative took shape. A family disappears. A fire. A missing child. A man tied to military operations that no one recalled. A dog found near a sealed base, scarred and silent. A microchip wiped clean. And now, that same man walking through her town again. Unbothered, unseen, but not unnoticed by Duke. She returned to the basement, the place where she had first uncovered the Harper story. This time, she brought gloves and a flashlight. She combed through folders not listed in the indexes, ones marked with single letters or numbers. After 2 hours, she found a thick manila folder stuffed behind a loose panel. The label was handwritten in blue ink, Reed T. Handler Notes. Her breath caught. She didn't remember pulling this name before. She opened it. Inside were printouts, scribbled notes, old photographs. One showed a soldier kneeling beside a younger German shepherd, nearly identical to Duke, down to the faint scar on the left shoulder. The dog's name, scribbled beneath the photo, Max. The handler's name, Thomas Reed. She shuffled through more papers. Descriptions of behavioral tests, mission assignments, and relocation efforts. Then, a note in sharp red ink. Max was pulled from field rotation after Handler went MIA. Dog later listed Kia during post-breach cleanup. Tag location unknown. Chip removed during retrieval, confirmed. Emma stared at the word, retrieval. Not recovery. Not rescue. Retrieval. Clinical. Like they had taken something they didn't want found. She whispered the name to herself, Thomas Reed, and behind her, Duke let out a soft, low sound. She turned. He was standing now, staring at the photograph she still held. His tail stiff. His chest rising faster. She knelt and held the photo closer. "Do you know him?" she asked. "Is this your?" The growl Duke gave was not a warning. It was grief. He sat, slowly, eyes locked to the image as if he hadn't seen that face in a decade but could never forget it. His body trembled. Emma reached out, placed her hand over his back. "You're Max," she whispered. "And that man, Thomas, he was yours." She sat on the floor, stunned. The stranger in the square wasn't random. He was connected to Salter. And Salter had been part of a cleanup team, the kind no one talks about. The kind that makes families vanish and memories scatter like ash. Max, or Duke as she had known him, was never meant to resurface. But he had. And now the secrets he carried were pressing against the surface again, one bark at a time. As the sun dipped low outside and shadows stretched across her living room walls, Emma knew 2 things with painful clarity. 1. Thomas Reed hadn't gone missing by accident. And 2. Salter's return to town wasn't a coincidence. Someone was coming back to finish what they had failed to erase. The next morning, Duke wouldn't eat. Not a bite. Not even his favorite meal, chicken and rice with a drizzle of broth. Instead, he stood at the door, tail low, ears sharp, nose twitching like something was calling him. Emma watched from the kitchen, tea mug in hand, heart beginning to race again. This had happened before, twice now, but not like this. This was different, focused, purposeful. He wasn't anxious. He was waiting. When she finally grabbed the leash, he didn't bark or pull. He simply led. Through the town, across the square, past the shuttered gas station and old lumber yard. Then, left onto a road she hadn't walked in years, Bell Street. The houses here were mostly abandoned or barely standing. Vines clawed up brick walls. Roofs sagged like tired shoulders. It was a neighborhood the town had quietly erased, letting time do what paperwork could not. Duke stopped in front of a house with shattered windows and a porch that leaned dangerously forward. Emma recognized it. Not from memory, but from the photograph in the fire clipping. This was the Harper home. He walked right up the rotting steps, careful, silent. Emma followed, her heart hammering. The front door was already cracked open, the frame warped by seasons of rain and wind. Inside, the air was stale, like ash and damp paper. Duke stepped forward and paused near the fireplace, then turned sharply and walked to the far end of the living room where the floorboards sagged beneath a stained rug. He looked back at her. She nodded, bent down, and slowly peeled the rug away. The floor beneath was warped and discolored, but intact. She tapped it gently. Hollow. Her hands shook as she grabbed the edge of one loose board and pulled. The wood groaned in protest, splintered at the corners, then gave way with a dry snap. Beneath was a shallow crawl space, dirt floor, and something buried in the middle, wrapped in tarp. She reached in, pulling the bundle free. Inside, 3 burned identification cards, edges blackened, names partially legible. One was Thomas Reed's. Another read J. Calloway, Operative Field Lead. The third had no name, just a photo burned nearly beyond recognition. All had the same symbol stamped faintly into one corner, a hawk inside a circle. Something military, but not standard issue. Beside the IDs sat a scorched badge. Police, or something like it, though the markings had been scratched off deliberately, the way someone erases a name from a headstone. And at the very bottom, a small metal box, sealed with a rusted lock. Emma pulled it out carefully, her breath held. She turned to Duke, who sat beside her now, tail still, watching her like he knew exactly what she was about to do. She whispered, "You brought me here for this, didn't you?" His eyes didn't leave hers. Not for a second. They didn't open the box there. Instead, Emma wrapped it in her coat and carried it back in silence. She placed it on her kitchen table like it was made of glass, unsure whether it would hold answers or more questions. The lock was weak. Emma pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Inside, tightly packed, were sealed envelopes, black and white photographs, and one audio cassette wrapped in a sheet of military paper. The first envelope contained coordinates. Not printed, handwritten. Several locations, each with a short coded reference next to them. Unit 9, T, Clean Out B Delta, and one that stood out. Doghouse 12, R, Non-Compliant Handler, Watch List. The second envelope was thicker. Inside were photographs of uniformed men standing with trained dogs. Some of the dogs had handler names on their collars. One of its nooks. Emma's stomach turned. The dog in the photo looked exactly like Duke, just younger, stronger, brighter-eyed, but unmistakably him. The background looked like a base, perhaps Afghanistan, maybe even domestic. The shadows were long, the sun harsh, the men squinting. But one man, his face was circled in red ink. It wasn't Thomas. It was Marcus Salter. The final envelope was sealed tighter. Emma hesitated before opening it, but when she did, a single line of text caught her eye, typed on standard military paper. If this box is found, the operation has failed. Below that was a list, names, places, code names, and next to each, neutralized, extracted, unconfirmed. One name at the bottom had no status. Just one word, Reed. And under it, in different handwriting, dog missing. Handler MIA. Assumed betrayal. Emma sat back, breath caught in her throat. They hadn't just lost track of Thomas and Max. They had been trying to erase them. Someone high up had labeled them as a threat. A risk. Duke had survived. Had escaped. And carried the truth in his instincts all these years. Outside, the wind picked up. Duke stood and walked to the front door, standing guard again. And suddenly, Emma knew this wasn't just about memory. It was about justice. About something long buried, literally, and a dog who had never stopped trying to dig it back up. Words spread quietly at first, like wind moving through tall grass, never seen but always felt. It started with whispers in the post office, glances traded in line at the diner, and hands paused mid-sweep on porch stoops. People who hadn't spoken about Bell Street in years began dropping fragments of memory like cracked marbles on hardwood floors. "That house always felt unfinished," said Mrs. Talbot, sweeping dust from her welcome mat. "Strange how fast it burned down. Real strange." An old man near the barber shop claimed he saw men in unmarked trucks the day after the fire. No logos. No uniforms. Just tension in the air, like a secret no one wanted to breathe. And then came the questions. Why now? Why is it all coming up again? The answer walked on four legs beside Emma down Main Street every morning. The answer had eyes that remembered and instincts that refused to forget. Duke had become something of a mystery himself. The children didn't run up to pet him anymore. Their parents called them back, whispering just loud enough for Emma to hear. "That's the dog who barked at the man. The one who won't stop digging up ghosts." Emma tried to ignore it, but the energy in town had shifted. Everyone was remembering, but no one wanted to say the words out loud. Not yet. The files she had uncovered were still safely hidden. She hadn't shared them. Not yet. But the decision of whether to keep quiet was slipping further from her control with each passing day. That evening at the grocery store, Emma felt eyes on her. Sheriff Wayne Miller, an old friend of her father's, a man who had once brought casseroles after the funeral, watched her too long from behind the checkout counter. His hands were in his coat pockets. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You all right, Emma?" he asked as she passed the ice cream aisle. His tone was smooth. Casual. "Fine," she replied too quickly. He nodded, glancing down at Duke. "He seems more active these days." "He remembers something," she said simply. The sheriff blinked. His lips parted for a moment as if to reply, but then he said nothing. Outside, Duke froze just before reaching the car. His body went rigid. Hackles lifted. Then the growl came, low and long, not a warning but a verdict. He was staring directly at Sheriff Miller, who had stepped outside and stood under the awning, arms folded, watching them both. Emma gently tugged Duke's leash, but he didn't budge. He didn't bark. Just growled, never breaking eye contact. The sheriff shifted his weight, tried to smile again. "You should get him looked at," he said. "Aggression like that isn't natural." Emma looked down at Duke. "No," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the sheriff. "It's memory." They left without another word. That night, she sat on her porch, lights off, watching the road. Duke lay beside her, wide awake, facing the driveway. Her phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn, Thomas Reed's widow. "They're watching again. Be careful. Some people don't forget. Some people don't forgive." Emma typed back. "Duke growled at the sheriff tonight." The reply came fast. "Wayne Miller was assigned to Bell Street fire. I only just remembered." He signed off the final report. Emma dropped the phone in her lap. Her fingers were cold. Sheriff Miller hadn't just been around during the fire, he had signed it into silence. In the following days, the town grew more restless. People asked more questions. An elderly woman came to Emma's porch and handed her an envelope. Inside was a faded photograph of the Harper family on their front lawn, a small girl holding a balloon. "I remember them," the woman said. "I never believed they just left." But no one wanted to hear that then. Not even the sheriff. More photos appeared. Then stories. Small ones. "I remember seeing that dog years ago," someone said. "Same scar. Same eyes." Emma collected them all. Every fragment. Every remembered face. And all the while, Duke grew more vigilant. He paced more. Guarded more. As if he knew, finally, the town wasn't just remembering. It was waking up. And someone, maybe more than one, was hoping it would go back to sleep. The meeting was supposed to be routine, Just another sleepy Monday night in the Maple Hollow Town Hall where budgets were reviewed and potholes discussed. But that night, the seats were filled. Not with officials and planners, but with people, residents who hadn't attended a single meeting in years now sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering nervously, eyes flicking toward the front where Emma stood with a folder in her hands and Duke sitting squarely at her feet. His presence was silent, but undeniable. A weight in the room. Emma's voice, when she spoke, didn't tremble. It didn't shout. It simply told. She laid out the timeline. The file from the basement. The photos. The microchip. The sealed box. The connections between the Harper family, Thomas Reed, and the man in the photograph, Marcus Salter. Her words echoed off the hardwood walls, growing louder with every page she turned. When she held up the charred badge and the dog tags, no one coughed, no one shuffled. The silence was complete. Duke watched the room like a witness called to the stand. And when Emma finished, she said only one more thing. This dog has been trying to tell us something. For years. And now that he has, what will we do with the truth? The council was stunned into stillness. But the room wasn't. Voices rose in waves. First questions, then anger, then names of loved ones. Others spoke of nights they never made sense of, files that disappeared, neighbors who moved away too suddenly. Then came the media, alerted by a whisper on a journalist's blog and pulled in by the phrase, war dog, and buried truth. Cameras showed up outside Emma's home. Microphones followed her to the market. A headline hit the regional news by morning. German Shepherd exposes forgotten town conspiracy, dog's memory reopens military case. The story spread faster than wildfire in the dry hills of July. Online forums speculated wildly. Former service members wrote in from across the country, some recognizing names from old rosters, others thanking Duke, Max, for his service. And then, just days later, they found him. Marcus Salter. He was arrested quietly in a cabin 2 counties over. No resistance. No weapons. Just a stack of old maps, burned documents in the fireplace, and a photograph of a much younger Max pinned to the cabin wall. Emma wasn't allowed to see him. But she didn't need to. The moment Duke caught his scent as they passed the sheriff's cruiser, his body stiffened. The growl came low, dangerous, not as a reaction, but as a reckoning. The town square fell quiet again, just like the day it all began. The trial wasn't formal, not yet. But Salter was brought before the town council during an emergency meeting. He wore a calm face, but his eyes darted like someone watching shadows move on the walls. When asked why he returned, why he buried evidence, his answer wasn't what anyone expected. "I was protecting this town," he said, "from what it would become if the truth ever got out." Gasps filled the room. He spoke slowly, deliberately. Thomas Reed was a good man. But he found something not meant for civilians. Arms being moved. Protocols broken. Not by accident, but for profit. He had a conscience. "I had orders." His gaze locked briefly with Emma's. "You think I wanted him gone? You think I enjoyed silencing a handler and his dog? I followed orders to protect the greater mission. To keep Maple Hollow from becoming a target." A woman near the back shouted, "So you killed him?" Salter didn't blink. "I removed a variable." Duke let out a bark so loud it shattered the tension into jagged edges. He pulled forward, teeth bared, body alive with memory and rage. It took all of Emma's strength to hold him back, not because he was dangerous, but because he knew. The council moved quickly after that. Salter was turned over to federal authorities. The files were handed off to investigators. But the council passed one resolution unanimously before the night was over, a full review of Bell Street's fire records, reinvestigation into the Harper case, and a formal acknowledgement that Emma and her dog had uncovered what the town had tried too long to forget. That night, Emma sat with Duke in their front yard, the stars spinning slow above them. "You were right," she whispered, fingers running through his fur. "You never forgot. And now, neither will they." Emma didn't expect the knock. Not after everything that had unfolded, Salter's arrest, the media whirlwind, the flood of old wounds suddenly bleeding in every corner of town. But that morning, just after sunrise, a federal officer appeared on her porch. No badge flashing, no jacket with bold letters, just a plain suit, serious eyes, and an envelope. "You've been requested," he said, voice low. "By Salter. One visit. One condition, you bring the dog." She hesitated. Duke sat beside her, calm but watchful, his breath shallow, ears tilted slightly forward. A silent yes. Emma nodded and followed. The room was small, sterile, part of the county's temporary holding facility. Salter sat behind a pane of reinforced glass, no shackles, no uniform, just the same strange stillness he carried like a coat. His eyes lit up when Duke entered. The dog didn't growl this time. He stared, but without aggression. It was something else, like recognition mixed with unfinished business. Salter leaned forward. "He's older now," he said quietly, "but still sharp. Still remembers the difference between a guilty scent and an innocent one." Emma didn't answer. Salter sighed, then slid a folder across the desk to the guard, who passed it through the slot. "They think I'm just a disgraced ops handler. But I wasn't just removing threats, I was managing a threat no one wanted to believe existed. Underground identity laundering, child extractions, human trafficking under the disguise of veteran support programs." He looked at Emma, face unreadable. This town wasn't just a coincidence. It was a drop point. Quite forgettable. Until your dog remembered. Emma opened the folder. Photographs. Code strings. Maps with pins. One photo showed a group of teenagers inside a warehouse, their eyes covered, hands bound. "These were real," she whispered. "Yes," Salter said. "And many are still out there." She looked at Duke. He hadn't moved, just listened. But something in his eyes flickered, like a switch from rest to readiness. His body leaned forward slightly, tail stiff but not raised. Alert. Focused. Salter leaned in closer. He was trained for more than detection. He was part of a shadow K-9 unit, used in black site investigations. When Reed started asking too many questions, they labeled him. When Max, your Duke, refused to leave his side, they tried to erase them both. Emma's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I failed," he said. "I protected operations. I didn't protect people. You brought the story back to light, and that means someone will take over. But not everyone knows how to follow the trail. Your dog does. He remembers smells, patterns, places. I need his help to finish what Reed started." The air between them thickened like fog in a pine forest. Emma stood, voice trembling. "You expect me to trust you? After everything?" "No," he said. "I expect him to decide." She glanced at Duke, who took 2 slow steps forward toward the glass, nose close to the metal divider. He didn't growl, but his ears flattened slightly, something between caution and acknowledgement. A low whine escaped his throat. It wasn't fear. It was conflict, as if some part of him knew Salter had once been part of his mission, his world, even if it was broken. Salter whispered, "He doesn't want revenge. He wants resolution." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room with the folder on her lap, a fire quietly dying in the hearth. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the windows. Duke lay at her feet, staring at the door, waiting, like he always had. She opened the folder again. This time, she noticed something new, coordinates scrawled in the margin of one photo, along with the word, "Still active." Her fingers trembled. She looked down at Duke. "Is this why you came back?" she asked softly. "Not just for the past, but for what's still out there?" His ears twitched. For the first time, Emma realized her role wasn't just to protect a dog with a past. It was to honor the mission he never got to finish. The air in Maple Hollow shifted again, But this time, it wasn't just whispers, it was arguments. In coffee shops and church parking lots, on porches and inside grocery aisles, the town was dividing. Some said Emma had done the right thing. That Duke was a hero, that truth mattered no matter how long it had been buried. Others weren't so sure. "She brought trouble to our doorstep," murmured a man in line behind her at the pharmacy, "stirring up ghosts that were better left alone." One woman shook her head at the park, watching her kids swing. "What if she's wrong? What if that man really was protecting us?" The words sliced into Emma like quiet blades. She hadn't asked for fame. She hadn't chased it. She followed a dog who couldn't forget. Duke wasn't the same either. He'd become even more alert, as if the air itself whispered to him. He followed Emma from room to room, slept at the foot of her bed again, and perked up at every engine that passed by the house. And yet, he was calmer, like something inside him had settled. Like the closer they got to finishing what Thomas Reed started, the more peace Duke could taste. But peace wasn't what the town gave them. Protesters began gathering near the courthouse, some carrying signs that read, "Protect our heroes," others with photos of missing persons under the banner, "Justice Buried." Emma started receiving anonymous letters again, some supportive, others threatening. One read, "You should have kept your dog on a leash. Now we all pay." She burned that one in the fireplace without reading it twice. A town hall was called, this time open to the public and media. Emma didn't want to go, but she had to, because Salter's offer still hung in the air, poisonous and persistent. He wanted Duke's help, claimed to have information that could shut down a trafficking ring still operating under new names. But trusting him meant crossing a line. It meant leaning on the very man Duke had once snarled at like death itself. It meant rewriting the rules of loyalty, and Emma didn't know if she had the right to make that call. The town hall was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. The mayor sat stone-faced at the front. Sheriff Miller, still under quiet investigation, watched from the side, his expression unreadable. Emma stood at the front, Duke beside her, heart hammering beneath her sweater. A young man in the crowd stood. "You want us to trust the same guy your dog warned us about?" he asked sharply. "What changed?" Emma took a breath. "The facts," she said. And something harder than that, Duke didn't growl the second time. A woman raised her hand. "Dogs can be trained. Maybe that's what this is." Another layer of manipulation. Emma looked down at Duke. His eyes met hers. She remembered the countless nights he'd sat by the porch, stared into darkness, whimpered in his sleep as if trapped in memories he could never explain. She remembered his instincts, how he found that box, how he led her to the house on Bell Street, how he knew who the real threats were when no one else did. "Duke isn't just trained," she said, her voice steady. "He's remembered. That's different. That's deeper. And I trust his memory more than I trust half the people who claim to protect this town." A long pause. Then, "What if you're wrong?" The question sat in the air like smoke. Emma exhaled. "Then I'm wrong. And I'll take that blame. But if I'm right, and we don't act, then someone else disappears. And next time, there won't be a dog to dig them back up." The mayor cleared his throat, thanked her, and ended the meeting. No vote. No resolution. Just more silence. The kind that breaks things slowly. That night, she sat on the porch with Duke lying beside her, head resting on her knee. The moon was high, casting silver light across the yard. A breeze stirred the trees. She whispered, "Do we help him?" Duke didn't move, didn't bark. But after a moment he stood, walked to the end of the porch, looked at the road, and sat, waiting. Emma followed his gaze. She didn't need to ask again. The wind came in colder that morning, sweeping dry leaves across Emma's porch like forgotten memories trying to speak. Duke had been restless since dawn, pacing along the back fence, sniffing the corners of the yard as if chasing a scent only he could recognize. He scratched once at the garden shed, twice at the oak tree by the fence, but then something shifted. He froze, then bolted toward the far end of the property, beyond the fence, where the woods began. Emma had never seen him move like that. Not since the day he first barked at the stranger in the square. She grabbed her coat, boots crunching against the frosted grass as she chased after him. He didn't bark. He didn't wait. He led. Through low brush, past the rusted fence line that had once marked the town's limits, and into a narrow clearing surrounded by trees. He stopped suddenly at a small patch of earth covered in moss and leaves. Emma saw the tension in his body, head low, tail stiff, one paw raised. He looked back at her only once before starting to dig. His claws hit something hard within minutes. Emma knelt beside him, brushing back the soil. A wooden box, small, weathered, and bound by 2 layers of decayed rope, peeked through. It was sealed with a simple rusted latch. She pulled it free and sat back, heart racing. Duke sat beside her, chest heaving but calm, steady, as if he knew they had arrived at the end of a long, winding trail. She opened it slowly. Inside, sealed in plastic, was a thick stack of papers, military records, letters, and photos. One of them made her gasp out loud. It was the same photo of the Harper family, only this time, the edges were not burned. And behind them, just barely visible in the background, stood a man in uniform. Not Marcus Salter. Sheriff Wayne Miller. Her hands shook as she flipped through the stack. More documents, shipping manifests, personnel lists, approval forms, all bearing Miller's signature. One report included a line she couldn't unsee. Operation Cleanlight, distribution complete. Handler terminated. K9 presumed destroyed. The handler listed was Thomas Reed. And the approving officer, at the bottom? W. Miller. Emma sat frozen, mouth dry, as Duke leaned into her side. The truth Duke had followed all along wasn't just about strangers or distant enemies. It had been buried right here, in the soil of their own town. Covered up not by men in suits from far away, but by someone who sat in meetings, waved at church, and signed off on safety reports like nothing ever happened. By noon, the story broke. She handed the entire box to the journalist who had been following her story since day one. The headline went viral in less than an hour. Sheriff implicated in secret military cover-up, War Dog uncovers final link. The town erupted. People gathered outside the sheriff's office, demanding answers. Some wept. Others shouted. Many simply stood still, trying to process the weight of what they had ignored for so long. Emma didn't go. She stayed home with Duke, watching the coverage on the small living room TV, the volume low, Duke's head resting on her lap. "I was wrong," she whispered to him. "It wasn't the stranger. It was one of us." Duke didn't react. He just sighed. The long, slow breath of someone who had known all along. Later that evening, the mayor addressed the town with trembling hands and a crackling voice. "We believed what we were told because we wanted to, because it was easier. But the truth, this truth, was always here. Buried, guarded by a dog no one listened to until now." Outside Emma's window, cars passed slowly, their headlights sweeping across the driveway like ghosts returning to a place that finally remembered them. The courtroom was packed, but no one spoke. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears, waiting to break. Every seat filled, the town's entire heartbeat gathered into one room under creaking wooden beams and high windows that hadn't let in light like this in years. Sheriff Wayne Miller sat at the defense table, his face hollow, pale, not the man who once led parades or handed out candy at the Harvest Festival. He looked older now, shrunken by exposure, not time. The evidence had piled like bricks over the last 2 weeks, sealed reports, forged clearance slips, coded letters signed in his hand. It was undeniable. The man they trusted had weaponized silence. Emma sat near the front, Duke lying at her feet, the weight of his body a grounding force. The moment came quietly when the judge read the last statement and nodded toward the gallery. Before sentencing, there is one more witness requested by the court. Not for testimony, but recognition. The bailiff opened the side door. Duke stood. He didn't need a command. He walked forward on his own, calm, eyes steady, tail low but proud. The sound of his paws on the polished floor echoed louder than any speech could. He paused at the front, then turned, not to Sheriff Miller, but to the coat that had been placed beside the judge's bench. Thomas Reed's old service jacket. The one Evelyn had found packed away, smelling faintly of cedar and memory. Duke walked to it and gently lay down beside it, resting his head on the worn fabric like he had done 1,000 times before, like home. No one moved. No one breathed. The judge stood slowly. Let the record reflect that this animal, retired K9 Max, known now as Duke, acted with more integrity than many sworn to protect. Let the court also note that his actions directly led to the unearthing of a cover-up, the exposure of a criminal conspiracy, and the restoration of a veteran's honor. Applause wasn't allowed in court, but it happened anyway. Gentle. Rising. Some clapping, some weeping, all standing. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment. Sheriff Miller was taken away without a word. His legacy shattered. His secrets no longer safe. Marcus Salter, still under observation but now fully cleared of the central crimes, was released that same evening. He didn't return to the town square. He disappeared quietly into whatever shadowy place had first shaped him. But before he left, he asked to see Duke one last time. The meeting happened in the back of the courthouse, out of public view. Salter knelt in the gravel and looked into Duke's eyes. "You were always the better man," he whispered. Then he stood and walked away. And Duke? He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just watched the man disappear, like watching the final piece of a puzzle fall into place. In the days that followed, the town of Maple Hollow transformed, not with parades or banners, but with humility. The same streets that once ignored Duke's warnings now painted a mural of him on the library's west wall. The caption beneath it read, "Justice knows its way home." Veterans came from out of state to meet him. School children wrote letters. And Emma, she just smiled quietly when people passed her on the street and thanked her. "Don't thank me," she'd say. "He's the one who never stopped believing there was more." At home, the porch was Duke's throne again. He no longer paced at night. He slept deeply. And every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he'd sit beside Emma, looking out over the town he'd guarded in silence for so long. His eyes calm, his duty complete. And though he would never speak, he had already said everything. Spring came to Maple Hollow not with fireworks or grand events, but with gentle acts of remembering. Just past the oak-lined path behind the old church, near the edge of the woods where Duke had once dug through frost and silence, the townspeople built a memorial. Simple, honest. A smooth stone bench facing a bronze plaque embedded in the earth. The names of the Harper family carved in careful script. Liam, Denise, Harper Jr. beneath it, one line etched deeper than the rest. Lost, then found, in truth, not in time. No ceremony was held. No ribbon cut. The town had learned that not all healing needed speeches. The memorial stood quiet, surrounded by flowers people left without being asked. Daisies, dogwood branches, sometimes a folded flag. And every evening, just before dusk settled over the treetops, Duke walked there. On his own. Emma never called him. He just rose, stretched, and padded down the winding path with steady grace, his joints slower now, but his purpose undimmed. He'd reach the bench, lower himself gently to the ground beside the plaque, and rest his head on his paws. Sometimes he'd stay until stars began to prick the sky. Just watching. Just guarding. As if waiting for someone to return, or for something more to be understood. People came to see it. Not tourists, locals. A sheriff's deputy on his way home. A mother with her daughter after school. Veterans who had driven hours just to sit in silence with the dog who had done what so many humans could not. He became a fixture of the town's evenings. They called him the Last Sentinel, though no one said it to his face. He didn't need the praise. Emma watched him one evening from her porch, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. The sun was gold on the horizon, stretching long shadows through the grass. She knew he'd return before nightfall. He always did. He always had. And as she sat there, she thought back to everything. His bark in the square, the hidden files, the photo in the box, the way he had known before anyone else did what the town had forgotten to remember. She whispered into the breeze, "Some voices bark. Some truths, they walk on four legs." Behind her, the house was quiet. He had made it so. The town changed after that. Not in loud ways, but deep ones. Local schools added a history unit about K-9 units in war. A mural of Duke's journey appeared downtown, not stylized or heroic, just him walking, watching, listening. The new sheriff didn't wear sunglasses inside or ride in parades. He worked the desk most days, humble and present. And no one forgot what silence had cost them once before. As for Duke, he kept his vigil. Until, one evening, he didn't rise at sunset. He sat beside Emma on the porch, head nestled against her thigh, breathing steady. But when the sun dipped below the trees, he stayed. Didn't move. Just closed his eyes and sighed. Peacefully, fully, completely. And the wind carried his breath down the path he had walked so many nights. No barking. No fanfare. Just memory.